"Lieutenant Hayes, you will not salute that man." Captain Derek Sloan's command cracked across the academy courtyard just as Ethan Hayes stepped away from the commissioning line. The brass band had gone silent. Rows of folding chairs faced the flag-draped platform beneath a hard blue Virginia sky, and nearly 300 guests turned toward the voice. Ethan stood in a new Army dress uniform, the gold bars of a second lieutenant bright on his shoulders, his right hand already beginning to rise. 20 feet away, beyond the white rope marking the ceremonial area, Walter Hayes waited in a worn Navy suit. At 78, Walter carried the quiet weight of someone who had learned long ago that dignity did not need an audience. His shoulders were slightly bent, his silver hair combed neatly back, and one hand rested inside his coat pocket around a small silver coin he had polished before sunrise. He had been waiting for this moment since Ethan was 8 years old. Sloan moved between them, his shoes striking the pavement with measured authority. "Return to formation, Lieutenant." Ethan did not move. His eyes remained fixed on his grandfather. Walter had arrived 2 hours early, wearing the only suit he owned and a narrow tie Ethan had given him the previous Christmas. He had sat through every speech, every name, every burst of applause without once drawing attention to himself. Now, when the one promise that mattered was seconds from being fulfilled, a captain half his age stood between them like a locked gate. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "he is receiving my first salute." Sloan's jaw tightened. "The approved sequence assigns that honor to your training officer. This gentleman is not listed as a participant." A faint murmur moved through the crowd. Walter saw Ethan's hands close at his sides. He knew that posture. He had seen it when the boy was 12 and standing up to a school bully, and again when he was 19 and refusing to quit after his first failed fitness test. Pride could steady a man, Walter knew, but it could also push him across a line he could never uncross. He gave Ethan the smallest shake of his head. "Do not risk this for me." Ethan understood, but the hurt in his face deepened. Sloan turned toward Walter. "Sir, you need to step back into the guest section." Walter's voice was low, roughened by age, yet it carried clearly in the still air. "He promised me his first salute." Sloan glanced at the silver coin now visible between Walter's fingers, then at the old man's plain suit and empty lapels. There were no ribbons, no polished medals, nothing that announced a history worth noticing. Then he made a promise he was not authorized to keep. The words landed colder than the shadow crossing the courtyard. Walter looked at his grandson, standing straight beneath the colors, and slowly closed his hand around the coin. For one brief second, the metal pressed into his palm with the weight of another unfinished salute, another young lieutenant, and a promise made decades ago. Then Walter stepped back from the rope, giving up the place he had waited a lifetime to stand in. Walter moved toward the rear of the courtyard without protest, each step measured, his polished shoes making almost no sound against the concrete. 45 minutes earlier, he had entered through the east gate carrying a cream-colored invitation in one hand and the silver coin in the other. His name had been printed beneath the words "Reserved Family Seating, Row 1, Seat 4. He had checked it 3 times before leaving home, not because he doubted the card, but because some moments felt too important to trust to ordinary paper. At the seating area, Captain Sloan had glanced at the invitation and then at a local businessman standing nearby with 2 academy officials. "There has been a change," Sloan had said. "We need the front row for distinguished guests." Walter had looked past him at seat 4, where a new white card now displayed another name. "My grandson requested that seat," Walter had replied. Sloan had given him the practiced smile of a man accustomed to ending conversations. "There is an excellent view from the rear section," Walter could have argued. He could have asked for the commandant. Instead, he had folded the invitation along its original crease and placed it inside his coat. The day belonged to Ethan, and Walter would not stain it with a public dispute. He walked nearly 60 yards to the last row and sat beneath the edge of an oak tree, where branches shifted in the warm breeze and broke the sunlight into restless pieces. From there, the faces on the platform were small, but Ethan was easy to find. Walter recognized the straightness of his shoulders and the way he pressed his lips together when trying not to show emotion. Staff Sergeant Claire Bennett noticed something else. Each time another graduate stepped forward, Ethan searched the front row, then the center section, then the aisle. His eyes moved with increasing concern until they finally found Walter beneath the oak. The change in Ethan was almost invisible. His shoulders eased. Walter lifted 2 fingers from his knee in a quiet greeting, and the young man faced forward again. During the speeches, Walter listened without shifting. He heard words about duty, tradition, sacrifice, and the unbroken line between generations. Around him, families raised phones, children whispered, and proud parents wiped their eyes. Walter kept one hand inside his pocket, turning the old coin between his thumb and forefinger. Its edge had been worn smooth over decades. A deep dent marked one side, and beneath it the initials were barely visible. No one near him knew why he carried it. No one knew he had polished it at 5 o'clock that morning at the same kitchen table where Ethan had once practiced his salute as a boy. When Ethan's name was called, Walter rose before anyone else. He did not cheer. He simply stood, straightened as much as his back allowed, and watched the gold bars settle onto his grandson's shoulders. Claire Bennett saw him then, not as an old guest in a faded suit, but as a man standing at attention without being told. Something in the precision of it made her look twice. Now, as Walter reached the rear rope after Sloane's order, Claire looked from the empty front row seat to the folded invitation visible inside his open coat. The ceremony had not misplaced him. Someone had decided he did not belong. Claire stepped away from the line of officers and crossed the courtyard with the controlled pace of someone who knew that. Urgency drew attention. Walter had reached the guest barrier when she stopped beside him. "Sir, may I see your invitation?" she asked. Walter removed the folded card from his coat and handed it to her. The crease was sharp, the paper clean, and his name was unmistakable. Claire looked toward the front row, where the replacement card still rested against the chair beneath the shade canopy. "You were assigned seat 4, she said. "That appears to have changed," Walter replied. There was no bitterness in his voice, which made the answer feel heavier. Captain Sloane approached before Claire could speak again. His expression remained polished, but irritation had begun to show beneath it. "Staff Sergeant Bennett, return to your position. I have already handled this." Claire held up the invitation. "Sir, Mr. Hayes was listed for family seating." Sloane barely looked at it. The seating plan was revised for protocol reasons. "And the first salute?" she asked. Sloane lowered his voice. "The lieutenant's approved recipient is Major Collins. We are not changing the sequence for an unverified guest." Walter's fingers tightened once around the silver coin in his pocket. "I have a veteran identification card," he said. He drew out a worn leather wallet and removed a faded card sealed beneath cloudy plastic. Sloane took it with 2 fingers, examined the washed-out photograph, then passed it back. "This cannot be scanned, and the service information is incomplete." "It was enough when the invitation was issued," Claire said. Sloane's eyes hardened. "This is not your decision." A gust moved across the courtyard, snapping the flags above the platform and carrying the low hum of conversation through the chairs. Ethan remained in formation, but his gaze had returned to the rear barrier. Walter saw the concern in his face and gave him another small nod. "Stay still. Follow the order. Do not let this become your first mistake as an officer." Sloane noticed the exchange. "Lieutenant Hayes has a professional obligation now," he said. "Personal arrangements do not override ceremony." Walter looked at him steadily. "A promise is not an arrangement." Sloane glanced toward the platform, where the master of ceremonies was preparing the next announcement. His patience narrowed. "Today represents the future of the Army, Mr. Hayes. It cannot be delayed by undocumented stories from its past." Claire felt the words settle over the space between them. Walter did not flinch. He had heard younger men dismiss older things before. Old tools, old methods, old names, old loyalties. Time made some people mistake survival for irrelevance. "I am not asking you to delay anything," Walter said. "I am asking you to let my grandson keep his word." Sloane pointed toward the public walkway beyond the rope. "You need to leave the ceremonial area now." Walter took one slow breath, then stepped through the opening. As he moved, the edge of his folded invitation caught against his coat. The card slipped free and landed face up on the pavement. Beside it, the silver coin fell from his hand and struck the concrete with a clear metallic note. It rolled in a narrow circle before settling near Sloane's polished shoe, its dented surface flashing once in the sun. The coin lay between them, small enough to be overlooked and old enough to have outlived every uniform in the courtyard. Walter bent to retrieve it, but Claire reached it first. She picked it up carefully, turning it in the sunlight. One side carried a deep crescent-shaped dent. The other bore 2 worn initials and 3 words nearly erased by time. T.M. Bring them home. This belongs to you, Claire asked. Walter extended his hand. It has for a long time. Sloane glanced at the coin and then toward the platform. Staff Sergeant, we are finished here. Claire returned it to Walter, but the cool metal had already opened a door in his memory. The courtyard faded beneath the soft rhythm of flags in the wind, and for a moment he was standing in the narrow hallway of a small house 12 years earlier. Ethan was 8 years old, thin at the shoulders and serious beyond his age, wearing Walter's old service cap so low that it nearly covered his eyes. The boy stood before a hallway mirror with his right hand pressed against his forehead. Like this? He asked. Walter leaned against the wall, holding back a smile. Not quite. He stepped behind Ethan and gently lowered the boy's elbow. Your wrist stays straight. Your fingers stay together. Ethan tried again. His hand wobbled. Why does it have to be perfect? Walter looked at their reflections. His own hair had only begun to gray then, but the years were already visible around his eyes. Because a salute is not about moving your hand. He adjusted the cap on Ethan's head. It is about showing someone that you recognize what they carry. Ethan frowned thoughtfully. Like respect, Walter said. And trust. And responsibility. The boy lowered his arm. Did people salute you? Walter looked toward the small wooden case on the hallway shelf. Inside were a few ribbons, a folded flag, and photographs he rarely explained. Sometimes. Did you like it? That was never the point. Ethan studied him, waiting for more. Walter crouched until they were eye to eye. A uniform should tell people whom you serve. It should not tell them whom they have to admire. Years later, after Ethan received his acceptance letter to the officer training program, he found Walter at the kitchen table repairing an old leather watch band. Ethan placed a cream-colored card in front of him. On it, in careful block letters, he had written First Salute, reserved for Master Sergeant Walter Hayes. Walter read it twice before looking up. You do not owe me this. Ethan shook his head. It is not payment. Then what is it? Recognition, Ethan said. For what you carried. Walter had no answer ready. He folded the card and placed it beside the silver coin near his coffee cup. Now, beneath the bright Virginia sun, that same promise stood 50 feet away in a new uniform, watching him from formation. Sloane motioned toward the public walkway again. Mr. Hayes, you need to continue moving. Walter closed his fingers around the coin. He could have told them about the kitchen table, the crooked childhood salute, or the years when Ethan had needed someone to teach him that duty was more than obedience. Instead, he placed the folded invitation back inside his coat and stepped beyond the rope. Some promises, he knew, became heavier when spoken aloud. Others revealed their true weight only when someone tried to take them away. Walter had taken only 3 steps beyond the rope when Claire looked again at the coin in his hand. The words had been nearly erased, but the initials remained clear enough beneath the dent. T.M. She had seen them before, not on a coin, but beneath a framed photograph in Colonel James Mercer's office. The photograph showed a much younger man standing beside a transport helicopter, one arm supported in a sling, his expression tired but alive. A brass plaque below the frame read Lieutenant Thomas Mercer, Kandahar Province, 2004. Claire turned toward Walter. Sir, may I ask where you got that? Walter stopped, but did not face her immediately. Across the courtyard, the announcer's voice carried through the speakers, calling the newly commissioned officers into position for the first salute ceremony. Chairs shifted. Families leaned forward. Ethan remained rigid in formation, his attention fixed on the rear walkway. It was given to me, Walter said. By Lieutenant Mercer? The question reached him like a sound traveling across many years. He turned then, and for the first time, Claire saw something change behind his pale eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. How do you know that name? Sloane stepped closer, his patience worn thin. Staff Sergeant Bennett, this conversation is over. Claire did not look away from Walter. Colonel Mercer keeps a photograph of his father in his office. There is a coin mounted beside it. Same inscription. Same unit symbol. Sloane gave a dismissive breath. Commemorative coins are common. Not this one, Claire said. The symbol belongs to a rescue detachment that was dissolved nearly 20 years ago. Walter lowered his gaze to the metal resting in his palm. The dent caught the sunlight, a small shadow carved into silver. His father carried the other one, he said quietly. Sloane folded his arms. And you expect us to accept that without documentation? Walter looked at him with the calm of a man who had stopped expecting every truth to be believed. I do not expect anything from you, Captain. A helicopter passed somewhere beyond the academy grounds, its distant rotors beating softly against the blue sky. The sound rolled over the courtyard, low and steady. Walter's thumb moved across the dent in the coin. Sloane noticed the motion and reached out. Let me see it. Walter's hand closed before Sloane could touch the metal. The movement was not quick, but it was final. No, Sloane's face tightened. If you are presenting an object as proof of military service, I have the authority to inspect it. I am not presenting it as proof. Then what is it? Walter looked toward Ethan. The young lieutenant stood less than 60 feet away, but the white rope and the captain's authority made the distance feel far greater. A debt, Walter said. Claire heard the answer and felt the last of her uncertainty disappear. Men who invented stories usually rushed to tell them. Walter Hayes seemed determined to keep his buried. The announcer called for the designated first salute recipients to approach the marked positions. Major Collins stepped from the officers' row and moved toward Ethan. Sloane pointed toward the public walkway. Mr. Hayes, continue to the parking area. Walter slipped the coin into his pocket. Before he turned, Claire caught one final detail on its reverse side, a faded winged emblem split by a narrow line. She knew exactly where she had seen it. The matching coin in Colonel Mercer's office carried no dent, because the damaged one had been given away to the man who brought his father home. The distant helicopter crossed beyond the academy buildings, and the rhythm of its rotors pulled Walter backward through time. The clean Virginia courtyard vanished. In its place came a wide Afghan valley under a white afternoon sky, the air thick with dust and engine heat. Walter was 43 then, a master sergeant with 22 years in uniform, and a voice men listened to because it never rose without reason. A small recovery team had been sent toward an isolated observation post after radio contact failed during a sandstorm. Their orders were simple: locate the missing patrol and return before darkness. Nothing about the valley felt simple. Visibility dropped below 50 yards in places, and the wind erased tire tracks. Almost as soon as they formed, Walter moved by compass, terrain memory, and the faint outline of a ridgeline that appeared whenever the dust thinned. 3 miles from the planned route, they found the patrol sheltering near a damaged communications truck. Most of the men could move. One could not. Lieutenant Thomas Mercer sat against a wheel, pale with exhaustion, one boot missing, his left arm secured against his chest with a field sling. He was young enough to still look surprised by pain, but his first concern was not himself. Take the others, Thomas told Walter. The aircraft will not hold everyone if you carry me. Walter crouched beside him and checked the sky. The evacuation helicopter was already approaching, its sound barely audible beneath the wind. Everyone goes, Walter said. Thomas shook his head. That is not realistic. It is the plan. The plan changed. Walter looked at him. Not mine. The landing zone lay nearly half a mile away across uneven ground. 2 soldiers offered to help, but Walter assigned them to guide the rest of the patrol through the dust. He lifted Thomas carefully and carried part of his weight while the lieutenant forced his legs to keep moving. They advanced a few yards at a time, stopping when the wind became too strong to see. Thomas apologized twice. Walter ignored him twice. Near the landing zone, the helicopter settled into the haze, its rotor wash turning the world into a spinning wall of sand. The crew chief counted heads and signaled that space was limited. Walter sent the others aboard first. Thomas caught his sleeve. Master Sergeant, get on. Walter remained beside him until the crew secured the final seat. Only then did he climb aboard. As the helicopter rose, Thomas reached into his pocket and removed a silver coin. One side carried the unit emblem. The other had been struck against metal during the journey, leaving a deep crescent-shaped dent across the words. Thomas pressed it into Walter's hand. My father gave me 2 of these, he said. One for the man who taught me duty. One for the man who proved it. Walter tried to return it. Thomas closed his fingers around Walter's hand. Bring them home, he said. Then, despite the sling and exhaustion, the young lieutenant tried to raise his right hand in salute. He made it halfway before his strength failed. Walter caught his wrist and lowered it gently. "Save it," he said. "You are going home. That is enough." The memory loosened its grip. Walter stood again beneath the Virginia sun with the same coin in his pocket and the same unfinished salute waiting across the courtyard. This time, the young lieutenant wearing gold bars was his grandson. Claire waited until Sloane turned back toward the formation, then slipped behind the reviewing stand with her phone already in hand. She opened the academy directory and called the commandant's office. The line rang once. "Colonel Mercer's office," a civilian aide answered. "This is Staff Sergeant Claire Bennett at the commissioning courtyard. I need to confirm something about Colonel Mercer's father." The aide hesitated. "The colonel is already en route to Fort Belvoir." Claire looked across the lawn. Walter was moving toward the parking area now, one hand inside his coat, his pace slower than before. "Does the colonel still keep Lieutenant Thomas Mercer's deployment photograph in his office?" Silence followed. "Yes," the aide said. "Why?" "There is a coin mounted beside it. Silver. Winged emblem. The words bring them home." The aide's voice changed. "How do you know about that?" Claire stepped farther from the crowd and lowered her voice. "Because an old veteran named Walter Hayes is standing outside our ceremony with its match. His coin has a deep dent across the face. He says Lieutenant Mercer gave it to him." The line went quiet again, but this time Claire heard movement, a drawer opening, then the soft scrape of a frame being lifted. "Send me a photograph," the aide said. Claire raised her phone and captured Walter from the side just as he paused beneath the oak tree. The faded suit, the silver hair, the careful posture. Then she zoomed in on the coin visible between his fingers and sent both images. Less than 10 seconds later, the aide inhaled sharply. "Stand by." The call transferred. Road noise filled the receiver, followed by a voice Claire recognized immediately. "Colonel Mercer." "Sir, this is Staff Sergeant Bennett. Where did you find him?" There was no confusion in the question, only urgency. "At the commissioning ceremony, sir. He came for his grandson's first salute." Mercer's answer came low and controlled. "And where is he now?" Claire looked toward the walkway. Captain Sloane removed him from the ceremonial area because his service could not be verified. The road noise vanished for a beat. "He did what?" Claire explained the changed seat, the rejected identification card, and the order forcing Ethan to salute Major Collins instead. She did not exaggerate. She did not need to. Each fact seemed to tighten the silence on the other end. "Staff Sergeant," Mercer said, "listen carefully. Walter Hayes carried my father out of a valley when everyone else believed the evacuation window had closed. My father lived another 16 years because that man refused to leave him behind." Claire watched Walter reach the edge of the parking lot. "Yes, sir. Do not let him leave the grounds. Captain Sloane has ordered him out. Then delay him without creating another scene." Claire heard Mercer speak to someone beside him. "Turn the vehicle around. Now." An engine changed pitch in the background as the staff car reversed direction. "How far are you?" Claire asked. 7 miles. Across the courtyard, Major Collins took his assigned position in front of Ethan. Sloane leaned toward the young lieutenant and spoke through a fixed smile. Ethan's face hardened. Walter saw it from the walkway and turned away, choosing distance over the possibility that his grandson might disobey a direct order. Claire stepped into his path. "Mr. Hayes," she said, slightly out of breath, "please do not leave yet." Walter studied her. The captain made his decision. The captain is not the only one coming back. Walter looked past Claire toward the courtyard, where Major Collins now stood 6 feet in front of Ethan on the painted ceremonial mark. The announcer raised a microphone. Families lifted their phones. The band members sat motionless beneath the sun, instruments resting against dark uniforms, waiting for the final exchange. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer began, "we will now observe the first salute tradition for our newly commissioned officers." Ethan did not move. Major Collins offered him a quiet, encouraging nod, but Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the parking lot. Sloane stepped closer and spoke without turning his head. "Raise your hand, Lieutenant." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Sir, my designated recipient is not in position. Your designated recipient is Major Collins. That was changed without my consent." Sloane's smile held for the audience, but his voice sharpened. "This is not a negotiation. Complete the ceremony." Walter heard none of the words from that distance, yet he understood the posture of both men. Ethan stood too still. Sloane had leaned too close. The old habits of command were easy to read, even across 60 yards. Walter turned toward Claire. He will follow the order. Should he? She asked. Walter watched his grandson. Today is the first page of his career. It should not begin with defiance. On the courtyard, the announcer paused, uncertain why the salute had not begun. A restless murmur moved through the crowd. Major Collins lowered his voice. Ethan, I do not want a salute that belongs to someone else. Sloane heard him. Major, remain in position. Ethan finally looked directly at the captain. Sir, with respect, I cannot give my first salute to the wrong man. The microphone carried the last 5 words farther than he intended. The courtyard fell silent. Sloane's face lost its ceremonial calm. Lieutenant Hayes, you are refusing a lawful instruction in front of this academy. I am honoring a commitment made before I earned these bars. You will raise your hand now. Ethan remained motionless. The flag snapped once above them, then settled in the hot air. Walter closed his eyes for a brief second. Pride and worry moved through him in equal measure. He had taught the boy that honor mattered. He had also taught him that consequences did not disappear merely because a cause was just. Sloane stepped forward. Lieutenant, this will be documented. Ethan looked toward Walter one final time. Then document it accurately, sir. A dark staff sedan turned through the east gate before Sloane could answer. It moved faster than vehicles usually traveled inside academy grounds, then slowed sharply beside the reviewing stand. Heads turned as the rear door opened. Colonel James Mercer stepped out before the driver could come around. He wore his service uniform without a cover, as though he had removed it in the vehicle and forgotten to put it back on. His eyes found Claire first, then followed her line of sight to Walter beneath the oak. The colonel stopped. For one long second, the noise of the courtyard seemed to drain away. He looked at the old man, at the worn navy suit, and at the silver coin now visible in Walter's open hand. Mercer's expression changed with the force of recognition. Captain Sloane moved toward him. Sir, we had a minor disruption, but the ceremony is under control. Mercer did not look at him. No, Captain, he said, walking toward the rope. It is not. He crossed the courtyard while every officer and guest watched. When he reached the barrier, he lifted it himself and held it open for Walter. Master Sergeant Hayes, Mercer said, his voice unsteady despite its authority. This ceremony has been waiting for the right man. Walter did not step through the opening at once. He looked at Colonel Mercer, then at the hand holding the rope aside, and something in his expression softened. You know who I am, Walter said. Mercer glanced at the silver coin. My father made certain I would. The colonel turned toward the courtyard. Captain Sloane, restore the original first salute arrangement. Sloane stood rigid near the formation. Sir, the ceremony sequence was revised for protocol. Mercer's voice remained calm. Protocol did not remove Mr. Hayes from the front row. A decision did. No one moved. Even the flag seemed to hold still above the platform. Mercer faced Walter again. Did my father ever finish it? Walter understood the question before the words had fully crossed the space between them. He opened his hand. The dented coin lay across his palm, its worn surface catching a narrow line of sunlight. No, sir, he said. He came home. That was enough. Mercer stared at the coin for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the courtyard without the help of a microphone. My father came home because this man refused to leave him behind. A murmur passed through the guests, then disappeared as quickly as it began. Mercer did not list decorations. He did not recite dates or read from a record. He simply walked beside Walter toward the ceremonial mark. Claire lifted the rope fully. Major Collins stepped away from Ethan and offered Walter the position with a respectful nod. Sloane remained near the edge of the formation, his face pale beneath the summer sun. As Walter crossed the pavement, Ethan's composure finally broke. His eyes brightened, but his shoulders stayed square. Walter stopped 6 feet in front of him. For a moment, neither spoke. The years between the kitchen table and the commissioning courtyard seemed to narrow into the space between them. Ethan raised his right hand. The motion was precise, but not mechanical. It carried the promise of an 8-year-old boy in an oversized service cap, the discipline of a young man who had earned gold bars, and the gratitude of a grandson who knew exactly who had taught him to stand. Walter returned the salute. His hand trembled slightly with age, yet every angle was exact. The courtyard remained silent. When Ethan lowered his hand, Walter stepped forward and placed the silver coin into his palm. "Bring them home," he said. Ethan closed his fingers around it. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Walter gave the smallest nod. Then Colonel Mercer moved beside Ethan and turned toward the old veteran. "There is one more salute overdue." He came to attention and raised his hand. Walter looked at him, and for the first time that morning, the weight in his face lifted. He returned the salute that Thomas Mercer had begun more than 20 years earlier. Mercer held it one heartbeat longer than regulation required. Around them, officers straightened. Major Collins raised his hand. Claire followed. Then the entire line of newly commissioned lieutenants came to attention, their salutes rising together beneath the American flag. Sloan stood among them, silent, before slowly lifting his own hand. Mercer lowered his salute and looked at the captain. "Regulations protect honor," he said quietly. "They do not replace it." Walter asked for no apology. He needed none. Ethan still held the coin, warm now from 2 generations of hands, while the wind moved through the oak leaves at the edge of the courtyard. Some salutes were given to rank. The ones that lasted were given to the people who taught others what honor meant.